False positives and dynasty player profile building. That and more this week on the Footballguys Dynasty Show. And Jordan, we talk about this all the time at quarterback, wide receiver, tight end a little bit, but mainly those positions that they start flashing, they start to do something, and then the anointment occurs. And I think it's a good time mid-season to take a pulse of some players that might fit this qualification where you got to have a little bit of pause about what they've actually done pen to paper. And is that enough to now anoint them as the next great one?
Yeah, we see this all the time, and it's a really good opportunity to sort of take stock of where a player's actually at, what their production so far is signaling, and where they're valued, right? And you sort of combine those things and say, okay, that should give you a calculus on whether or not that player is overvalued, undervalued, right? Sort of what the market's looking at. So again, what do we talk about? We want productive player profiles. And then that's where we start. And then we come back and look at what players reflect those and at what prices we're getting them, right? That's really the way that player selection should be. And I think right now is a really good time, like we see from week to week, but you see with Fields, right? 3 weeks ago, Fields was, if you couldn't get a first for him, right?
Complete bust.
And now he's a top 8 quarterback. And
yeah.
So you see these things that happen again, then, and on the other side, like Russell Wilson, you know what I mean? Or Matthew Stafford, like these guys, it's an 8-week span and all of a sudden they're destined for a retirement home when, we know it's a more durable profile than that. So I think it's a really interesting thing. One thing I always think about in this lens is the CeeDee Lamb profile, right? That really expensive top 5 profile, like it reeks of DJ Moore when you haven't gotten all the way home yet. And we're sort of seeing that with Lamb, where he hasn't gotten truly all the way home yet for that elite number, that elite finish. And as a result, you're sort of behind what you should be based on where their cost is. So I do think it's a really important time to be thinking about that, especially with younger players, players that are underperforming, and rookies as well.
Yeah, I think, starting a quarterback here, I think you talk about profiles that are durable, ones that are more repeatable, predictable, and being able to do it twice. Mm-hmm. Coming home, and you've mentioned you have like a Supermax principle, right? A Supermax rule of getting home. And we've got some interesting quarterbacks not on Supermaxes, right? I mean, highly valued guys like Lamar Jackson, guys like Jalen Hurts, for example. And then you've got maybe, does that mean you have super confidence in Kyler Murray? Because technically he qualifies, but he's one that is tough to trust. And I think where I stand is Jalen Hurts and Justin Fields are two really interesting ones to me, because you look and see what they're doing. Hurts for last year plus this year, and Fields kind of feels like he's maybe 1 year behind in terms of it's a lot more rushing. Are the weapons going to come together? Is the passing going to come together? And you really got to step up to the plate. The price is huge. Price is key. I mean, again, you talked about Zach Wilson, for example. Oh, I can tolerate QB 20. Like that's a very palatable risk reward number and valuation. But when you start getting QB 7, 8, 9, like it gets very high and very expensive in a hurry. And that means, there are probably people out there that will have a QB 9 at QB 5. That's within the scope of spectrum of outcomes there of cost. And when you start going 9, 10, I mean, you're talking potentially first round startup, potentially. And we go back in time and think about all the early anointment of guys like Derek Carr, Jameis Winston, Marcus Mariota. You think of, what if you bought Jared Goff after that, the big season, that big early season, the one-off season, Carson Wentz, MVP level. These guys have had pretty decent high-level marks early in their career. Now, none of them sustained that to any degree. They were pretty much one-offs or 1.5 offs, or, oh, that's a really nice QB2 you got there on your Superflex depth chart for a span of time. Baker Mayfield. How about Blake Bortles? Taking his team almost to the Super Bowl, 35 touchdowns. So we're old enough to remember this stuff. But I think it's important because if you get in that zone and you say, well, who's kind of in that radius right now? So I would just say, be very, very careful. And how much have they really done? Like you just said, I mean, Justin Fields is really right now a matter of a month, right?
Yeah.
Now it's intoxicating. It's intoxicating. Let's stop and pause and just say, when you have the rushing upside like that, you can finish as a high QB1, and we can still have massive questions about you as an NFL quarterback. And that's the tough part. Lineups versus what NFL security do you have? Do you have, for example, the Eagles are undefeated.
Right.
Like their floor right now is pretty high for the season outcome. And they do have the Saints pick, which is looking high. But should I be a little less critical on Jalen Hurts, for example? Like the whole pedigree plus contract, allegiance factor. I mean, is it crazy talk to say the Eagles are going to, like, they have a decent probability of like, oh, we got the 105 pick. Like, let's sit here and think about quarterback. Like if they go 13-4, 14-3, even higher, get to the conference finals. What is this, NBA? Championship or higher. I mean, right. Does that like insulate him job security wise? And we should just throw all this stuff out the window.
I mean, I think we're gonna know. We'll know pretty soon. There's two answers that I have to that question. Number one is we'll know pretty soon because we'll sort of see how the rest of the season plays out. And I think early on in the offseason, we'll have an indication. Are they going to draft somebody? We'll know that by May, and that should be an indication. I think if it's, I don't know, 28 other teams in the NFL, maybe 31, but I think definitely there's a couple of teams that maybe you could put in this conversation, but I think Philly is one of them, one of the rare few that may say, thanks, Jalen Hurts. It's been great. We're either going to cash out now or we're going to go sort of the Kirk Cousins angle on this, which is, a couple of tags, something like that, or we can trade him at a ceiling, what have you. There's a couple of reasons for that. Number one, the finances behind that, right? If you think that Jalen Hurts is good but not great, once you start paying him great prices, you can't support the good that's around him. And all of a sudden he has to carry you in a way that you don't have you can't afford AJ Brown. You can't afford Dallas Goedert, who was awesome on Thursday night, by the way. You run into problems where you can't necessarily pay an elite offensive line, right? You sort of run into those problems. And that's why you've seen consistently teams with quarterbacks on rookie deals go to the Super Bowl because the finances of it are such a great edge. I think the Eagles understand that. I think probably the same front office that went through the Carson Wentz experience probably understands that. And you don't often get a front office that has seen this twice, right? That's the lack of longevity in the NFL is going to, you don't get this twice very often. And so they're going to face that decision. It would be a huge historical outlier to have a quarterback hit twice, including a potential top 6 seasonal finish on a rookie deal, and not be an enormous profile of dynasty, right? That's it, right? That's it. I would point to a couple of things on I have become a Jalen Hurts supporter, particularly when you look at his metrics, when you look at what he does on non-play action, and the stuff from a clean pocket, right? The true, what you would say, quote unquote, passing stuff. He's grading out as one of the best in the league. Right. He's literally got the best non-play action grade of any quarterback for PFF. And so that speaks to me in a way that's like, okay, that's a very hard thing to accomplish. And he's performing among the elites at the position. We put him in the box of being this running quarterback. I think he's probably proven more, even though, like, is it exactly like you'd maybe draw it up in a lab? No. But given what they're doing right now, he's performing at an elite level. Like, that guy typically gets paid. So, but I share it. If he was on almost any other team, we wouldn't be having this conversation, in my opinion. I would have already pegged him in. But because it's the Eagles, I could see them thinking about this a little bit more than a normal team would.
So you're definitely, it sounds like when we get to the offseason, we get to startup draft potential season. It sounds like you're definitely going to have some, especially if the season's still going on. I mean, startups are in January, February. We may not have good intel on where they're headed with this, but it sounds like you're going to wait for when in doubt. Let's just, hey, there's other options. There's other, because we've said before, I mean, let's rewind the tape 6 months. We were talking about, hey, not a bad year to trade up, right? Trade up to 102, 103. You can get Mahomes there, to get a Herbert, to get a Josh Allen. You can trade back from the mid first and get Dak. I mean, you have a lot of options. So you don't necessarily have to stay. I mean, let's just project. I mean, if we're talking he's a mid QB1 in cost, I mean, that's going to be somewhere in round 1. But you have the option to move up and down. So it sounds like you would be one of saying, like, it's still an incomplete, like, let's wait. A June startup draft, you might have a different take if the cost is QB6.
100%. I don't like to take uncertain bets.
Yeah.
And I think
January would be an uncertain bet.
Absolutely. And I think that's a lesson.
Yeah.
Right. That's absolutely a lesson to take from this, which is the bets that you make in January should be very risk averse. So you lean towards even more
They
safety.
get to June and he's been paid or they didn't draft anybody. They're building around him. They're saying all the right things. And he's not maybe on a tag, something, this is year 4, right? Year 3 coming up to year 4.
He has one more year left on his contract, but
it would be a contract year, right?
Yes. This is the time where you start to look at this. Again, he's going to
wait
be
a second. Since he's not a round 1 pick, they can just tag him, right?
I mean, they could start tagging him.
They could restricted. I mean, they could give him one of those restricted tags.
I'm not sure on that. I don't know. Okay. I don't know the specifics on that.
Right. Well, anyway,
but they could definitely use the franchise tag on him after year 4, right? So if they want to, they have him under control for basically.
Well, just like Lamar Jackson, they have control for a while.
Yes.
Like the Kirk Cousins, it took a while, and again, Washington was complete dingbats. Like they let him literally walk out the door when they could have gotten a big haul from San Francisco for him. And anyway,
can we go back for a second? Can we just revisit that, because I think that's interesting. Like I was just thinking about this today. Like
one example I can think of.
Yeah, if you go back like to the Kirk Cousins thing, like you absolutely sign up for what Kirk Cousins is. Like if you're Washington and you know everything that has played out since then, you sign up a million times over, right?
Yeah.
And it was kind of crazy that they didn't when it happened, right? Like this again, that's
they doubled up on quarterback. Rare. They whiffed on the first one. They got the next one right, and yet they still are out in the woods.
Yes.
They still get out in the woods where, like, people want to bang on Kirk Cousins. He's absolutely good enough.
Absolutely. Yes.
He may not be one of the killer assassins, but he's definitely good enough.
Yes.
And the fact that a team would just, we saw, the Bengals, right? They tripled down on Andy Dalton. Joe Flacco got the allegiance. And I think Kirk Cousins is better than both of those guys. And yet he changed teams. Absolute free agent. So, but it's a different world. We've seen quarterbacks moved more regularly in the last 2-3 years than ever before.
Right.
So, if you pass, I don't know if it's quite as big of a deal. I'll just say, I think they're more accessible than before. The interesting thing about Hurts, and one of the things I track, it's amazing in terms of job security when you're getting close to the line. The guys that are below the NFL average are highly at risk. Is the touchdown interception rate ratio I've discussed before. Jalen Hurts. He's 1.41, and it's a little below Lamar Jackson. It's ahead of Kirk Cousins for their career. Josh Allen, he's way up there. So, and this year he's 2.8, which is an unreal. That's basically Aaron Rodgers for his career. So, that's based on this, should have zero concerns. Zero.
And that's touchdown to interception ratio?
No. What you do is, it's completion. It's a completion. If you're ahead of would be the main takeaway for the four.
All right, I lost you a little bit there, but all right, so we'll keep going on this a little bit here. I think Chad's having a little bit of a tech issue, so he's going to jump back. He's going to jump out, jump back in, and we'll keep going. So I do think, like, overall, generally speaking, right, we're looking at player profiles. We're looking at trying to find durable ones, right? And the question is, again, I think one of the themes that I've seen, especially in the off season, was I thought early on in the off season last year, I'm much more apt to try and trade up, right? Because you have so much insecurity. A guy like Hurts is a really good way to look at this. Now, you have you have some questions about him, so it's worth paying up to other guys, right? If that's, you feel more security in a guy like Herbert or Allen or Mahomes, right? You're willing to sort of make that move up, where as the offseason goes on, you get more answers. You have a better understanding on where guys are in terms of security, right? In terms of all of those things. And the guys that are further down the position, more vulnerable, right? They're more vulnerable, especially vulnerable at wide receiver, at running back, right? All of the guys that are sort of further down the position tend to be more vulnerable, especially early on. So what do we say? Elite quarterbacks early in the draft are the best bet elite quarterbacks stay elite. And they kind of go, and that's a long-term trend. So once you get someone that's really good, the Allens, the Mahomes, right? You go back to the Brady's, the Mannings, right? All of these guys, once they've been good, the Roethlisbergers, once you get to an elite level, you tend to stay there for a long time. Like, that's the best bet you can make in Dynasty. And so early on in the calendar, you feel more confident doing a bet like that. As the calendar goes on, you get more information. Last year was a good example. Hurts opened up a little bit more opportunity because you're like, okay, we know that he's going to be the starter. He's dodged a bullet in this draft, and they've added assets around him. So he's a good example of this, of trying to play the calendar and sort of understanding the certainty game. And I think we have Chad back.
Yeah, absolutely. And, wide receiver is another one that, talk about getting from good to an NFL alpha, is such a huge hurdle to get over, such a huge wall to climb. And the false positives are real, because the one-off seasons, and I think the most dangerous one I've mentioned before, of a guy I liked coming out as a prospect, Cortland Sutton, of the you're waiting around, and what you do is you sit there with a guy that has finished at wide receiver 24, 30, 42 early on. And yes, that's a positive indicator of where things could go. But the anointment, when you start valuing those guys in the top 10 to 15 of Dynasty, and over veterans that might be a few years older, but they've been there, done that, the Mike Evanses of the world, the Brandon Cooks of the world, you have to be really careful. And I think people forget. I honestly think people get Alzheimer's because we do it every year. Look at Elijah Moore, for example. This is a great one. So Elijah Moore, and actually Rashad Bateman. So Bateman's out for the year. He had a couple good games early in the season. We never know where this one would go. But the point is, he's 2 years in. He got anointed after year one. He's going to be awesome. And the answer is no. So we will see, because now they have an off season of, is Bateman going to be our guy? Is he really going to take over, and be higher than Andrews in the pecking order? Now you've got Isaiah Likely in the mix. You got all these younger players who have some pedigree too, that have been producing in his absence. And Elijah Moore, again, we can say off the field is a major factor here, but they drafted over the top of him the very next offseason to Garrett Wilson. So let's be careful. And who knows? Denzel Mims is still a factor on that depth chart of a guy that maybe we wrote off way too quick, of just like, he's dead, he's gone. So Elijah Moore, I think there were people that have him in the top 15 or so.
Yeah.
Like in this offseason, at the wild pie in the sky, you got to be super, super careful about this stuff. I wonder, Devonta Smith, is he a good player that may not get all the way home? Is he going to be an alpha guy? Is he AJ Brown on the same depth chart? Like, is he going to have trouble? Is this going to be Waddle and Tyreek? Is this going to be Roddy and Julio? Like, or is it just going to be Devonta Smith? Yeah, he's pretty good. He's a Robin, but he's like a lower level Robin. Over the next 3 years, do we look back and his best finish was wide receiver 28?
Is he Robin to Dallas Goedert's Batman? Is that what you were? What you were indicating?
There you go. Yeah. So, but my point is, like, you're operating within this prism of like, well, they're young, they will improve. That's probably the most dangerous line in all of Dynasty. oh, well, they're young, they will get better. That phrase is uttered on NFL and fantasy podcasts so often because they're year 2, because they're year 3, they have to get better. There's a laundry list of guys that don't get better ever.
Yeah.
And there's a laundry list of guys the next year with all the expectations, they pull up a flat tire and they're on the side of the road. How about Chase Claypool? Remember, let's rewind.
How good was he as a rookie?
Right? Well, like, that's the thing. If we stop the tape in October or November after he had that 3-touchdown game or whatever it was, he was mossing guys, and it's been almost straight downhill. And now he's been traded since. Traded on a rookie deal. So, and drafted over, by the way. So I think and the other guy on that depth chart got paid. And then they drafted a 4th rounder. They've done everything they could to say, Chase Claypool, we don't trust you as far as we can throw you. Yeah. And we're going to throw you over to Chicago, by the way. So I think, again, we forget these moments in time. Like when people go, oh, like when I say this phrase, Matt Jones had a week or 2 window where he was traded for a future first. And people were like, A, who's Matt Jones? And B, I don't believe you. Is
that a sign you're old? Like, is that a sign you've been playing Dynasty for a long time? Is when you remember Matt Jones?
Well, no, when you start saying, well, I remember when Walter Payton at one point was, when you start saying those stories. But they're like, oh, I remember a 9-year window when LaDainian Tomlinson was worth multiple firsts. I'm that old. But I wrote down a few others' names. Robbie Anderson never got home. A lot of people liked him. I'm sure way more than he produced when he was younger. Christian Kirk never got home. He's been good, but not great. Has he ever really made a difference? Cortland Sutton, he's having his best season. Man, has it taken a while. How much expectation has there been on? It's almost like he's a post-hype sleeper. It's almost like it's been too long. Darnell Mooney. Oh, was it? I mean, you may have said it because it's logical. The targets have to go somewhere. We were like Cole Kmet for the win, Darnell Mooney for the win. What we didn't account for is what if they throw it 20 times a game? Right. What if the 20% market share means absolutely nothing because they don't throw it enough? Right. So I wonder if Rashad Bateman, he was like top 15, top 20 this offseason. Big expectations. And okay, we're still waiting. You got to wait now at least 10 more months before anything could possibly happen. And you know what? A lot could go wrong in 10 months. Right. They could trade for somebody. They could draft somebody. So I think wide receiver is that other position. Be super careful.
Absolutely. And I think too, and we've talked about this, so I'll just say at tight end, right? Assuming that the difference between, what's that book? Good to Great, right? The difference between good and great at the positions, right? They vary, right? And I think it varies. There's variance in there. Like there's a lot of things that can sort of have an impact about how hard it is to go from really good to great. Tight end is by far the hardest. Yeah. By far the hardest. It basically, to get all the way home as a tight end 1, you need to either be a Hall of Famer or like Dallas Clark. Right, like it's like those two, like it's those two avenues. So when you're making a bet that's not one of those two things, it's a really hard bet to sort of make at the position, right? To sort of get all the way to elite, and I think we've seen some of that with Pitts, and I think that should be a learning lesson for us.
Yeah, and the other thing is, if you finish tight end 8 a few times, does that how much?
It don't matter.
Right? Yeah. So
the difference between I looked this up, I think it was yesterday. The difference between tight end 2 and 3 is the same difference between tight end 3 and tight end 10. Yeah. Right. Like it's a flat
tight end
tier.
10 and 30, like
correct.
It's
yes.
So like this whole, like I have a few leagues where it's just like I'm off in the woods, but you know what? What I embrace it. I'm like,
who cares?
If I sit here and start Juwan Johnson, I don't feel like I'm that far behind that many teams.
You're not. You're behind 2 teams, right? And Andrews is hurt, right? So, yeah.
So just embrace it. Like this whole, like I used to freak out and it's like, oh, well, let me trade a decent amount for Pat Freiermuth. Like that's a dumb move.
Yes.
Like you're doing nothing.
Right.
You're moving from 8 feet. The pool is 8 feet and you're drowning, and you move to 7 feet and you're drowning. Right. Like, and you paid to do it.
Right. You still can't.
You paid to move under that rope, the partition, to go in that other part of the pool. And it's like, well, it's still taller than me. I still can drown. It's like there's no point in that. All right, Jordan. Jordan McNamara, Chad Parsons here, episode 127 of the Football Guys Dynasty Show. I want to remind you about all the great content over at footballguys.com. We've mentioned before the League Dominator app, as well as the functionality on the website. You want this. You're going to upload and import your leagues, customize it, and every Tuesday, you can just pop on. You're going to get all the projections from all the staffers. Lineups are going to be a breeze. It's going to highlight waiver wire players. It's also going to recommend your lineups later in the week. It also has a trade function. You can look at how to optimize your lineup. You can see how much it improves or decreases your bench. So much that feeds into there, and all you have to do is connect and import all of your leagues at a variety of platforms. So that, in addition to the written content, all the podcasts that you already get, it's such a value add to your Dynasty Rolodex of information. And that's going to be going over to footballguys.com/dynasty winners and subscribing today.
And I will shout out before we do the drop. I will shout out. I went to the trade function. I ran a trade that I had through here. I was like, this is going to really help my team. And you want to know how much it helped my team? Like 0.05%. Like it was less than 1% increase. And I was like, okay, this is not a trade that I'm actually going to make. I thought it was going to make me better. And it
double
did.
Check.
So it's absolutely double checking.
Check.
It's super helpful.
It's time for the Stash of the Week, powered by Sleeper.
Sleeper stash of the week time, and close to home, Jordan. And this is, I'm sure, an injury you are watching hyper closely. You are going to be squinting all week looking for intel on the throwing elbow and arm of Mr. Josh Allen, because a little bit dicey late in week 9, and he threw in a couple more passes. Neither one had the typical Josh Allen sparkle on it. And so we're going to be looking at Case Keenum. Sturdy veteran, super flex centric here recommendation. And I'm going to say, even if Josh Allen plays, he's still a player that we're now shading a little yellow. What happens if he gets hit again in the same sort of way, getting the ball knocked out as he's in his throwing motion? Common thing for quarterbacks, and a real stressor on the arm and the elbow, almost like a pitcher. So Case Keenum, quality profile, quality offense. And this is how sometimes
Yeah, having a little technical issue there with Chad. I'll just jump in on the Allen thing. I think the Dr. Gene's article from this week over at the site, I'll just read briefly from it. I think he wrote it Sunday night, and his quote was, he did a whole analysis. I'll point you there. Go check that out. Consider Allen to be on the probable side of questionable for now, but Monday's evaluations will better define his short and long-term status. The Monday update, which is super helpful, that Dr. Gene puts together. Quote, Sean McDermott said the Bills were still evaluating the extent of Allen's injuries. Chris Mortensen tweeted, Allen suffered an injury to his ulnar collateral ligament and related nerves. Although Allen finished the game, the need for more evaluation suggests specialist visits and further discussion of treatment planning. He's now trending questionable, and a multi-week absence is possible. Excuse me. So that is certainly a downgrade. That's, I think, one of the best parts of what we do is the actual interpretation of this that Dr. Gene gives us. That was something that really stuck out to me. Of course, I am at blame for this, and we will get into the stupidest thing I did this week, but I am to blame for this because I actually cut Case Keenum in a league because I was like, I can float him out there, add a backup running back, and this is what we get. We can't have good things, Chad.
Yeah. And that's the thing, I've said before, you try to float the quarterbacks out during a bye week, or a backup running back if you have to during a bye week, because nothing bad can happen. But if they're playing, it's the probability dice roll. It could happen. And yeah, like you said, that downgrade, we pay attention to that. If a guy goes limited, and then they downgrade to DNP on Friday, not good. No buenos. Right. Yeah. And if they oscillate back and forth, to DNP and limited, DNP again, like things are not going well. So you have to read those tea leaves, and it's early in the week, but Case Keenum is out there in some, shallow to moderate super flex and premium formats. And I think this is one that you've got to make sure, that even if you are good at quarterback, you can never be too good. You never know how buys and injuries are going to collide in key weeks for you. And this is one you don't want to let a Josh Allen team off the hook. If that's not you, you still don't want them to just be able to saunter in with a 3% bid, in a premium format and be like, la, 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 get my backup at the moment I need it. Like, you can't, don't let them do that.
Right.
That is just malpractice, in my opinion, because this is the type of thing of, you can be proactive. You can spend 1% bids, first come, first serve pickups with backup quarterbacks. Generally, unless it's 35, 40-man rosters in Superflex every week. But when something actually occurs, they become very costly. So what's your bidding strategy if Case Keenum, 25, 28-man rosters, if he's out there this week?
I mean, I think it's 10% would sort of be my thought. That's
Okay.
the initial number that I came down at. I could see more. And again, now I think it has to get more aggressive sort of as you go along. I would say this too, like I was doing some work on sort of the landscape of the NFL quarterbacks right now. If Case Keenum gets it together and plays well for a month, like there's a non-zero chance he's a starter somewhere next year. Like that's kind of the position we're at the quarterback position throughout the league. So I wouldn't necessarily rule that out. And again, as I sort of put that 10% number out there, I'm coming back to the fact that it's week 10.
It's a little late in the game. Right?
Yeah, if this is a shot to actually go out and get someone that may make a difference down the stretch, like how many more of those cracks are you going to get?
Well, and how many of these quarterbacks would make a difference? Let's if we project
and
the
maybe
injuries.
Keenum's not, right? Maybe he isn't. But if you're in a league where he's available and there's not a lot of backup quarterbacks other available, I mean,
even if there are, I would still say though. I mean, like I like Colt McCoy. Like we've seen him play reasonably well there in Arizona. He's back healthy. But looking at guys like Nick Foles or Blaine Gabbert or CJ Beathard, I'm just throwing out a bunch of guys. CJ Beathard, Jared Stidham. I mean, we saw Brett Rippon. Like, let's just keep playing this out. Are they really like they're a warm body?
Right.
They're a warm body that they have the single digit potential to put out in Superflex, which means you might have had better options easily in that Superflex spot than the warm body quarterback. So you got to be really careful. So I hold Case Keenum up in the Gardner Minshew kind of zone or Colt McCoy, where they could be viable and or make a difference to be someone who actually plays, actually performs, and the offense is conducive for such.
Sure.
And like you said, non-zero, that he plays his way in a Tannehill or Andy Dalton type fashion of future starts and future predictable starts. So yeah, this is a big one. Let's get to a few dynasty trades this week. First one, stock format. We got CeeDee Lamb for Jonathan Taylor, and Taylor is certainly an interesting player now because he's not playing, hasn't been a great year, coming off running back 1 last year, and Colts are all over the map in terms of how the next couple months go.
Yeah, what a weird scenario. I came back to this one was which one's the one that's most likely to change your outcome, and for me that's Jonathan Taylor. And I think we've talked about Lamb. We hit on Lamb a little earlier. I go back to where he came into the beginning of the season. Jonathan Taylor clearly ahead of Lamb. I think that's still true. I think Lamb's much more replaceable than a healthy Taylor is, and as a result, I'm going Taylor.
Yeah, I agree with that. Taylor's 23. So it sucks. Some players, some running backs string together 4, 5, 6 in a row of top 10, top 12 seasons. Taylor's not on that track this year, but still just 24. And I would remind folks that peak window is 21 to 27. So he will still be right in the meaty middle. And things change in a hurry. Offensive lines change in a hurry. I know that's eroded. Quarterback situation, non-Sam Ehlinger under center. A lot of things can look different. And I think Saquon Barkley is a good reminder, right, of being off the map for a while, but a big-time talent. And then, things write their course. He's 25, and now people are like, oh, Saquon Barkley was super risky and people were adverse to him. Weird. He's put up, two good months, and they're like, I don't remember that. They just got whitewashed. And they just... they got the light shining, and it's just like, I don't remember anything. But that's where we were with Saquon Barkley.
Yeah.
And Christian McCaffrey, right? Quote unquote, dude can't stay healthy. Well, he's winning you a bunch of games. So maybe you should.
Yeah. And the thing I would say too, like I've learned, I think the lesson that I've learned from this season, maybe more than any other, is that when you get the shot to take an elite profile, someone that's done elite things, and you get the chance to take them at a discount, you got to do it. Right. And I think that Taylor, this represents Taylor at a discount, right? We talked about McCaffrey, Barkley again. Like I was sort of on the is Barkley better than Devontae Booker? Sort of, it was half tongue in cheek, but it hadn't been clear in the past 2 years whether or not that was actually true. And it certainly is. We've seen elite stuff. I'm coming much more around to like really lean into guys that have eliteness in their profile and that are depressed, whether it's injuries, maybe even a couple of years injuries. That's probably one of the reasons I was still on Michael Thomas, coming into the season, just because he was so cheap and we had seen elite stuff from him. And honestly, like that's probably an argument for Juju, right? You keep looking at these guys who have done elite things at parts of their career and at depressed prices. Like there's some resiliency there that there's just not for other guys to go around them.
Were you discussing one of the other trades, Jordan?
No, I just finished up on JT. We can go on to the next one. The next trade we've got is Sutton for Gerald Everett and a 2023 third. With the person having a needed tight end.
Yeah. So is this a good way in FFPC Superflex to address tight end? Is it, it's Cortland Sutton, who is certainly startable. We talked about his profile a little bit earlier in the show. And is Gerald Everett high enough to say, yeah, this is a way to address the position?
I don't think this addresses it, to be totally honest. I mean, I think Sutton could be the beneficiary of a bounce back from Wilson. Right. And I think that is going to come. Like, I think if we saw the second half of the season, Wilson's a lot better. He can be a lot better fantasy wise and not even be that much better NFL wise, just by having a little bit better puck luck, to use one of your terms. And I think that's a real thing with his profile. You look at his touchdowns in particular, he's like scored half of his expected touchdowns, right? Those things regress. They really do. And I'm willing to sort of make that bet with a player that, frankly, like there has been in the history of the NFL, I think it's Aaron Rodgers, Mahomes, and Russell Wilson as being like the three highest likelihoods to throw touchdown passes on their attempts. Like it is a really high number. And so Wilson is not doing that right now. Why? Well, I think there's a lot of reasons why. One of them, I think, is just variance. And I think Sutton could be in for a big bounce back for the rest of the season. Again, don't pay for replaceability at tight end. That would sort of be my angle on this trade. And I think by giving up Sutton, you're actually paying. So I'd be very, very cautious on making that type of bet. I would hold Sutton. And if you're going to trade for a tight end, get one that really matters. You want to be in the top 5 of the position, Everett.
Yeah. I was thinking that needs to at least be a second. And then the other angle would be, well, maybe, if you are thinking about addressing the position, maybe in a more macro way, do you go after someone like Darren Waller, or do you go after someone a little higher on the food chain? Do you have to go Sutton and maybe just a touch for George Kittle, or someone like that? So I would try to aim a little higher if you are going to address that. And we've discussed before, hey, you're not that far away. And does Gerald Everett truly bridge the gap? And does he bridge the gap for more than, say, this run? And the question I always ask people is, if you're trading for need and to supplement your lineup, the gauge of if it's a dynasty trade is Gerald Everett this Thursday tears his ACL in practice. Do you still like the deal? Because that really can define things. Did you make a short-sighted and short-term scope on the deal of like, I'm buying? Because I've had that happen. I think years ago I bought OJ Howard, Tampa OJ Howard for the stretch run, dying at tight end, and he literally got hurt the next game. And I still thought the deal was fine, but it definitely gives you a different perspective when it hits that exactly with, I bought something, didn't even have it. Didn't have nice things for even one game. And again, I think this would be one that you absolutely regret if Everett gets hurt. Because you're kind of buying situation. They have a lot of other pieces that are out right now. Everett's benefiting in terms of a market share perspective, a floor perspective. But if everyone gets back healthy, next year resets, I mean, it could look greatly different. And again, buying a patch job, how about you just trade like a third for somebody? Keep Sutton, trade a third, which in FFPC doesn't mean a whole lot, to be fair. Third and a fifth, not a big difference there. All right, last one here, big boy deal. I'm assuming this is contender being a contender. We're trading Rashad Bateman, DJ Moore for Davante Adams.
How does the Bateman Moore side of this make you lose? That's what I instantly
How does it
looked at.
make you lose?
Right. What do they do that makes you lose this deal? Right.
Well, neither one gets home.
Mm-hmm.
Bateman never gets home, and
Mhm.
maybe the wide receiver one in Baltimore doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
It's Mark Andrews' show, and heck, maybe likely ends up being the number 2-3 option, and he's a hindrance over the
Right.
next 2-3 years as well. DJ Moore has never gotten home.
Mm-hmm.
Not that he has extreme competition right now for targets or anything like that, but massive quarterback question. He's had quarterback questions essentially his whole career. So if that continues, he's burning daylight. He's 25 right now, 26 next season. Checks watch, still waiting. So the calculus I would have is Davante Adams, he's 29, how many years, if it's this, let's just say it's this year and next year when he's kind of Davante Adams.
Yep.
Is that enough?
Yeah, I mean, I would basically go back to what you said about all of the sort of questions that you would have about Bateman and Moore, and like, at their high end, what do they do that's going to be more like at their high end? Do they ever get to a spot where it's Adams, right, or 80% of Adams, right? If
Either one of them,
if they're going to be sort of never going to get to that level, and you're in a win now window, I would do it. I think the question with Bateman's very real at this point about what he is. He'll be coming off an injury, hasn't gotten home all the way yet. I think people are still going to be optimistic, but I think I think this is a good deal because you're going up, and honestly, you're going up, you're consolidating two profiles that I think could have a little bit of a turbulent next 6 months to a guy that can really help you. And honestly, if you want to divest that Davante Adams investment at some point in the next 6 months, you can do it. Right. And I think you could figure out other ways to do it. So I like it. Jordan from 5 years ago probably wouldn't do this. Jordan from now would.
I had one thing, and just to pull a Jordan and kind of go sidewinder, and you might not know how this is connected, but I was thinking watching the Dolphins game this week, Tyreek Hill is a straight assassin.
Yes.
And he's doing it with Tua now. He and Waddle, in my opinion, are making Tua look really good. And I just wonder, Tyreek Hill, he's a year younger than Davante Adams, and he's having a better transition to a new offense, cheetah DNA. So I mean, is Tyreek Hill in this same conversation? Now, he hasn't done it as many times and as often as Davante Adams, but he's done it a lot. He's working on 6 straight years now in the top 10. And he's a year younger. I mean, is he another one as a contender to explore deals like this of 2 incomplete profiles, intriguing, probably appealing profiles to teams down the standings, but you get an auto start, no brainer, don't think about it. And, going that route, I mean, is Tyreek Hill also in that conversation?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, you could argue that he's even better, right? And that they've gotten the transition figured out to the tune of 3.5 points better per game. That's a real difference, right? That's approaching a half a win difference, right? That's a real difference there in terms of the difference between Hill and Adams so far in their transition. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a pretty savvy deal. And honestly, you could come back, and if you say it, I don't think deals like this tend to burn you. Because Bateman and DJ Moore have to burn you for
the pressure is on them.
Correct.
To get up, because you know what, if Adams gets hurt or if he erodes a little bit, he still is, not likely to just fall off to nothing. Typically, there's a pretty smooth transition downward when you look at such a long established career arc. And so even if he turns into a guy you start a lot and he just is not that elite option, he still may outpace where they're headed more in Bateman in general. And like what you're saying, the burn factor, you give up Adams and neither of these guys get home. And we talk about trying to force a rebuild, I'm not contending this year. Gotta sell Adams. dangerous. Dangerous to do that because hopefully you're contending next year. Bateman not starting the season. There's outcomes like Bateman not right at the beginning. Half the year's a wash. DJ Moore, he's wide receiver 20, but Adams is still there, still juicing, and just you gave that up. You gave up one of the guys that we have seen year over year be the guy until the passing game. And there's not many. If you are really stringent with that list, it's pretty tight.
Right.
It's
I'm
pretty
going to
tight
steal
list.
by the way, I always come into the show not necessarily knowing I'm going to write for my Fixing Your Dynasty Team column every Thursday. And I always come out of the show inspired by something. Burn factor is what I'm going to write about, because the idea
sunscreen
of
players.
Yeah. And like, how does someone actually make you regret it? And I go back last year, I traded essentially, it was a little bit more complicated than this. I traded Mac Jones for Devontae Adams. Two things from that. A, flags fly forever because I won. And B, I was trading a profile that honestly, even if he got to 90% of his range of outcomes, probably is not going to beat Adams in the near term. And now all of the downside is sort of on that Mac Jones thing. That's a real lesson that I've learned. And again, I think you do it with profiles like this, right? I'd much rather pay it now, right? Pay guys that aren't going to burn you. And pay it now than to pay down the line in future picks. And on the other side of that, right, when I'm going to do a deal like this, if I want to trade Adams and sort of reset the clock, I'd much rather do it with future picks or future assets sort of down the line, even into 2024, because they have the ability to really be high end, where right now you're trying to trade for guys that you don't know if they necessarily have that, right? Things are much easier to break your way with the randomness of the future pick than to try to pick off these profiles that, frankly, the burn factor is pretty low.
All right. Dumbest thing you did this week, Jordan.
I went to the Bills game at the Meadowlands and it was terrible.
Oh, no. Wait, you went to another one as well.
Two in a row. Yeah.
Two in a row. You got hot. You're on a hot streak.
Yeah, I wasn't.
So you did not enjoy the game.
It was 6 straight quarters of Josh Allen not being good. And it's like, all right, great. So, and then every Jets fan that I encountered on the way out wanted a piece of me because I was wearing a Bills shirt. And honestly, I have to say, Chad, Bills fans get a racket
was it at the Bills stadium?
No, it was in New York. It was in New York.
Good Lord, Jordan.
And so, but I have to say, Bills fans get a little bit of a tough rap at times. You know what didn't happen at all after the Bills beat Green Bay? I was there, and there was a ton of Green Bay fans. No one gave any Green Bay fan a hard time. And, that aspect of it, someone said on the way out, your quarterback's a fraud. Directly into my face. Of course,
does he know who his quarterback is?
His quarterback, the biggest throw of his quarterback's career has been throwing a 5-yard slant that didn't go for a touchdown in a Week 9 game. Okay, that's the biggest throw of his quarterback's career, and my quarterback's a fraud. So it wasn't necessarily even saying that. It was just the whole atmosphere of it being very antagonistic, and I'm probably good going down there for a while. I'll just say that.
How far is that trip?
It was like 4.5 hours
each way.
Yeah, it was on a bus.
You did it in one day?
Yes, we went down. Wow. I left my house at like 5:30, I think it was, and then I got back at like, I don't know, 11 o'clock, maybe something like that. It would have been a Chad trip from hell. It would have been the worst.
So not optimized. Not optimized at all. And wait, was the game? Did you watch the game on condensed or no?
I haven't watched it yet. I probably.
Well, no. I meant it was a joke. I mean, the game was 3+ hours. Just checking.
3+ hours. I did see. I was fortunate though. My one of my best friend in high school growing up, he works for the Jets, so I did get to see him. So that was probably. And I went with my family. That was nice too. They rooted for the Jets, which made it even worse. But it was a long day. It was a long day, and honestly, going 2 weeks in a row was a lot. So,
are you concerned at all about the Bills' chances to win the division?
No.
No. Okay. How many games does Josh Allen have to miss for you to be concerned?
The rest of the season.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Case Keenum forever. All right.
I mean, I just think that they have a lot higher floor. I mean,
no, I know.
You can't trust.
You'll believe it
Zach
when you
Wilson
see it. I know.
At all. I can't.
Well, in
at all.
Miami, I mean, again, these have been punching bags for
Right.
years.
Right.
Like this would be such a reversal. You gotta believe it until you see it.
Right.
All right.
What are the odds on the Patriots being the worst team in that division, by the way? It's
I
weird.
don't know.
This is
I mean, because
weird.
they're a
it's
high
weird.
floor, right?
Yeah, it's weird.
I don't know. But yeah, you want to talk about a quarterback being dragged to their record. It is Zach Wilson. Oh my goodness, that guy. Not good, and somehow they're coming out 6-3. All right. Couple quotes for the Football Guys Dynasty Forum this week. I tend to look at 2-year windows for Dynasty, which is shorter than most. Because of that, I don't value Javonte Williams as much as most because I think next year will be significant potential to be a lost year.
I agree with that. I think one of the best things for me to really refine my process is to think about in the next 2-year window. That's not to say I mortgage everything in the future for the next 2 years, but really trying to be good in this 2-year window. And what you'll find is outside of that 2-year window, there's a ton of uncertainty. And so when you get really good assets, really high-end assets, you can do a lot of damage here. And even when you're planning for further down the line, that planning can be very, it can just erode really quickly just by the natural, the natural miss rate of players that you're sort of planning for in the future. So I agree with that. Really thinking about now in the next couple of years, I think this is a little bit different answer than I would have given maybe 3 or 4 years ago, but very much so understanding, I think the numbers, understanding how often players miss, and it's really tough to plan into the future with such uncertainty about players succeeding and what they're going to offer you, even the really good ones. Right. I think you get really good high-end assets now, try and build around star players now, and those will help you both now and into the future.
Yeah, and I think one thing that hit home was how much roster turnover people have that don't even think about in Dynasty. I mean, if you have 25-man roster, half of that's going to be gone a lot quicker than you think. You churn it out for rookie picks. You also make some trades. And before you know it, I mean, you can look back 4 years and you're like, I got 2 guys. I got 2 or 3 guys on my team. And part of that is the erosion in the NFL terms, but part of that is erosion of just you have options, 9 months out of the year for being able to trade guys. You get opportunities. You may like guys, but I like the value even better. And you just there are ways they exit, not just retiring from the NFL or you cut them to the waiver wire. There's a lot of ways that your roster changes and morphs over time. So the whole idea of I traded away Javonte Williams and he's gone forever. No, you might be able to trade it. You might be trade back for him. You might find the value to be. We've had so many players that we talk about. Oh, hate the value. Like James Robinson. It's like, man, I did like the profile and I didn't push it enough, during the rookie draft process. And then you get to, oh my God, he's worth like a mid-first plus, and you're like, oh, I'm out on this. And now you're circling back and you're like, oh, maybe a late second, or just like he oscillates around a little bit. And you're like, well, I like him. I like him as an NFL back, and I especially like him as now he's being priced as a primary backup sort of cost. And there you go. So you can move in, out, and around based on how much their valuation is. All right, this is going to hit home, Jordan, because I know you mentioned him a couple different times. So last quote this week, you see Travis Etienne as a top 5 running back, ? Top 10, okay, but top 5, I'm not buying it. Too small of a sample size.
Name the players in front of him. And stop, right? If you're going to say that, name the players in front of him. And you can't, to me anyways, by the way, I almost fell out of my chair today. I was over on Keep Trade Cut, and do you want to guess who the top 2 running backs in Dynasty are, according to Keep Trade Cut's market-based rankings? Do you want to guess who they are?
Etienne and Walker?
In the opposite order. And I almost fell out of my chair. It's to me, the Walker thing, he's living off of good stuff that's hard to sort of maintain. I think Etienne is in a different category of he can do both, right? I'm not sure Walker can, and you don't pay that price for a guy you're not sure on, would sort of be the thought. You start looking behind that again, then Breece Hall's ahead of Taylor. That seems kind of wild to me. And you start looking at some of these things, I don't know if that's exactly how it would play out, but all of a sudden, like, it's really hard to name 5 5 guys in front of Etienne right now. Really hard would be what I would say. And then you start comparing him again. He is a little bit older for a second-year running back, but it's a 2.5, 3 year difference between McCaffrey. It's a couple year difference between Barkley, and Barkley's going to be a free agent, right? Hall's hurt. Taylor and him are about an equal age again, and then you sort of play out this year. How do you think that is? There's a balancing test to all of these things. He's younger than Chubb, right? You start going down the list, and you're like, oh, like, all right, like he's kind of checking a lot of boxes at a position that, frankly, right now has a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah, absolutely. And Etienne, yeah, I have him at 4, for example. The one quibble I have is obviously their high leverage opportunities in Jacksonville could be better, but we're talking about an offense on the rise. I think they're going to keep building around Lawrence next off season. I think the wide receivers could improve. We'll see about Ingram on the 1-year deal. He's hurt right now. We'll see if he misses time and how much. But yeah, Etienne is in full workhorse mode. And he's a guy that had a really good collegiate profile. There's a lot of people saying Etienne greater than Najee Harris in that class. And he just got off to a slow start. He had the pause button with the first year loss with injury. And frankly, that was kind of a good thing based on how Jacksonville was going last year. So save some tread and get to this year. But like you said, unequivocally naming names, to me, it ends at 3 with Taylor, Barkley, and McCaffrey there ahead of Etienne. And when you talk about, Swift, in that same mold, or Breece Hall with the injury, you got Kenneth Walker, who I just don't trust as much. And Seattle is not one that really optimizes running backs. And that's a concern for me because he's really an outlier of outliers. And at some point, whether it's later this year or next year, that's going to be hard to overcome in a macro sense. To overcome those magnets weighing you down just from getting goal line and targets there in Seattle. So, I think, and the list runs dry pretty quick, of guys that are legitimately younger that you say, I want to take on, all those years to move.
You said the guys that you could conceivably have ahead of him are, just so I have that right, JT and McCaffrey and Barkley, right? Those are the 3 guys.
That's what I have ahead of them.
Yeah. And then Walker, like if you wanted to sort of do that Walker deal, like just put Walker ahead of him for a second. There's 4 guys.
I don't know. Okay. I think, again, Breece Hall is 2 years younger. And if you think from the absolute 5-year window, but again, that's really risky to do. I thought Breece Hall without the injury easily ahead. And he was going to be right in that top 3-4 range. But it really shades things. And we've seen it take away part or most of the next year. Look at J.K. Dobbins as a cautionary tale of don't assume. And here's the other thing. You're going to have more windows on Breece Hall. Like when he got hurt, and still now probably, he's traded for almost as if he's healthy. So you can leverage that. You can buy back in Breece Hall if next September he's on the pup and not playing and stuff. You'll have more windows. It's not over. Look at Taylor right now. You'll never have another window again. There's a window. There's a window. They cracked it open. It's cold out there. Letting a little heat out. 10% discount. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All right. In this episode, we discussed a lot about profiles, wide receiver, a little bit of tight end, quarterback. Talking about Travis Etienne. Good conversation. Windows, turning over your dynasty team, and of course, some of the feature trades of the week. I'm Chad Parsons. He is Jordan McNamara. And until next time, good luck in your dynasty.